If you ever find yourself staring at a job listing that looks like the answer to all your problems, that promises security, stability, and an escape from whatever desperate situation you've found yourself in, don't trust it. Walk away. Close the tab. Burn the newspaper if you have to. Because there's no such thing as easy money, and anything that looks too good to be true always has a price. I wish I had known that before I saw the ad. Because now, as I sit in the dim glow of a flickering candle, trapped inside a house that doesn't let people leave, I can hear something knocking on my door. Not knocking like someone politely waiting to be let in, not knocking like a friend who's forgotten their keys. No, this knocking is slow, deliberate, a steady tap, tap, tap that seems to echo through the very bones of this place, like it's not coming from the other side of the door, but from somewhere deeper, somewhere much, much worse. And I know now, I should never have answered that ad. But back then, I wasn't thinking about consequences. I wasn't thinking about supernatural horrors, or cursed houses, or the kind of mistakes that can't be undone. I was thinking about survival. Because when you're desperate, when your world has collapsed around you, and every single option has been ripped away, you stop caring about red flags. And I was beyond desperate. It's strange, the way life can unravel so quickly, the way stability can slip through your fingers like sand, leaving you scrambling to catch the last few grains before they fall through the cracks completely. One moment, you think you have it all figured out, that you're managing, that you're getting by, and the next, you're sleeping in your car, counting the quarters in your cup holder, trying to decide whether to spend them on gas or food, because you sure as hell can't afford both. I wasn't always this lost. A year ago, I had an apartment. Nothing fancy, just a cramped one-bedroom in a part of town where you learn to sleep through the sound of sirens and your neighbors screaming at each other through the walls. I had a job. Not a career, not something I was passionate about, but a job that paid the bills, even if it drained every ounce of energy from me by the time I got home. And I had a plan, maybe not a great one, but at least a vague idea of how I'd work my way up, find something better, become something better. Then, like a row of dominoes, everything started to collapse. First, my hours got cut at work. Just a little at first, just enough to be frustrating, but not enough to panic over. Then more, and more, until one day, I walked in to find my manager waiting for me. A carefully rehearsed "we're so sorry, but we have to let you go" speech ready to spill from his lips before I even sat down. It wasn't personal, he assured me. The company was downsizing. Nothing I could have done differently. I was just unlucky. That was the word that kept circling through my mind over the next few weeks. Unlucky. It wasn't that I was lazy. It wasn't that I hadn't tried. It was just bad luck. The kind of bad luck that follows you like a storm cloud, soaking you to the bone while everyone else walks around dry, oblivious to the downpour drowning you. I spent weeks searching for something else, anything else, but job hunting is a cruel game when you're already behind, when your rent is overdue and the bills are stacking up, and every employer is looking for someone younger, someone with a more impressive resume, someone who doesn't already have desperation written all over them. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, my roommate, the only reason I'd managed to stay afloat this long, decided to screw me over in the worst way possible. I came home one evening to find everything gone. Not just the stuff, but mine too, the TV, the kitchen appliances, even my damn coffee maker. And worst of all, the rent money. 2 months' worth. Vanished. Stolen. I stood there in the middle of that empty apartment, staring at the space where my life had been, and felt something inside me crack. 3 days later, I was homeless. Living in your car isn't as romantic as movies make it seem. There's no freedom, no adventure, no thrilling road trips across the country. There's just exhaustion, the constant ache in your back from sleeping curled up in the driver's seat, the fear that at any moment some cop is going to knock on your window and tell you to move along, that you have nowhere to move along to. I tried to find work, fast food, retail, anything that would give me a paycheck, but every interview ended the same way. "We'll call you if we have anything available." They never called. I spent my days job hunting, my nights parked behind gas stations or in empty parking lots, trying to convince myself that this wasn't permanent, that things would turn around. But the truth was, I was running out of time. I was running out of everything. And then, one night, sitting in the corner of a grimy 24-hour diner, sipping a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt rubber, I saw the ad. The ad that changed everything. Live-in caretaker needed. Private estate. Secluded location. Free room and board. $5,000 per month. No experience necessary. It was so absurdly simple, so impossibly straightforward, that for a long moment I just sat there, staring at the words on my screen, waiting for my brain to catch up with what I was reading, waiting for the catch to reveal itself, waiting for the scam to make itself obvious. Because jobs like this, offers like this, money like this, they don't just appear out of nowhere, and they certainly don't fall into the laps of people like me. People who have spent the last few months scraping by, people who have felt the slow suffocation of watching their life collapse piece by piece until there's nothing left except desperation and exhaustion. I reread the listing once, then again, letting the details settle into my brain, waiting for my instincts to start screaming at me that this was too good to be real, that there was something deeply, fundamentally wrong about it, that nobody in their right mind would pay $5,000 a month just to have someone watch over their house. But the ad didn't change. The words remained as stark and unassuming as when I had first read them, printed neatly against the screen as if they had always been there, waiting for someone like me to stumble across them at just the right moment. $5,000 a month. A private estate, hidden away in some secluded location, offering not just a salary, but also free room and board, which meant I wouldn't have to worry about rent, utilities, or even food. And, most suspiciously of all, the one line that set my nerves on edge in a way I couldn't quite explain: no experience necessary, as if the only real qualification for this job was the willingness to show up, step through the door, and say yes. It made no sense, none at all, and yet, despite the countless warning bells clanging inside my head, I didn't care. I was exhausted. I was barely holding myself together, and I needed the money more than I needed answers. So, instead of stopping to think, instead of pausing to consider why a job like this would even exist in the first place, I let my fingers move on their own, clicking on the reply button, my desperation outweighing every last rational thought, trying to convince me that this was a mistake, that nothing in life is ever this easy, that people who fall for things like this never walk away unscathed. Hi, I'm interested in the caretaker position. Is it still available? The message was short, almost pathetic in its simplicity, lacking the careful wording I had used in all the other applications I had sent out over the past few months, applications that had gone unread, ignored, discarded without so much as a polite rejection. But something about this felt different. I didn't know how to explain it, not really, but there was something unsettlingly direct about the way the ad had been written, something that made me feel like this wasn't a normal hiring process, like I wasn't competing against dozens of other applicants, like the job wasn't even truly being offered so much as it was already decided, as if all I had to do was say yes and the rest had already been set in motion. I hesitated for the briefest moment, my thumb hovering over the send button, my body tensed with an unshakable sense of unease, the kind of unease that comes not from fear, but from certainty, from the quiet, gnawing knowledge that I was about to do something I couldn't take back, something that would change everything, something I might regret for the rest of my life. And yet, despite everything, I sent the message anyway. Most jobs take time to respond, if they respond at all. A few days, sometimes weeks, often never. Just an empty void of waiting and hoping and checking your inbox only to find nothing but silence staring back at you. So I expected this to be the same. I thought I would wait. I thought I would go to sleep with my phone sitting beside me, hoping for an answer, telling myself that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different, even though I had long since stopped believing that anything good was ever going to happen to me again. But I didn't have to wait, because less than 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed, the screen lighting up in the dim glow of the diner, and when I glanced down, my breath caught in my throat as I saw the response staring back at me, cold and final and immediate, as if they had been waiting for me to reach out, as if my message had set something in motion that had already been decided long before I even knew this job existed. Come to Blackwood Estate at 6 p.m. Directions attached. That was it. No greeting, no polite acknowledgement of my interest, no follow-up questions, no confirmation of who I was or whether I was even remotely qualified for the job. Just an address, blunt and impersonal, The kind of message that wasn't an invitation, but an instruction. Something about it sent a slow, creeping chill through me. Not fear exactly, but a heavy, unshakable sense of wrongness, like I had just stepped into something far bigger than myself, something I didn't understand, something I should have backed away from immediately. I stared at the message for a long time, my pulse thudding in my ears, my fingers tightening around the phone as the uneasy silence of the diner pressed in around me. And for a brief, fleeting moment, I considered deleting the message, pretending I had never seen it, pushing away the thought that anything about this had ever seemed like a good idea. But then reality hit me again, sharp and unrelenting. I was broke. I was hungry. I was running out of options faster than I could find new ones. And whether this job was real or not, whether it was a scam or something worse, it was still the closest thing to a chance that I had left. So, without letting myself think too hard about why my stomach was twisting itself into knots, without giving myself time to reconsider, I grabbed my keys, folded up the printed directions, and forced myself to stand up. And, as I stepped out of the diner and into the cold, empty night, heading toward my car, I kept repeating the same thought over and over in my head, trying to convince myself that I wasn't making the biggest mistake of my life. The worst thing that could happen is that it's a scam. The worst thing that could happen is that I waste a few gallons of gas. The worst thing that could happen is that I show up, realize it's all bullshit, and drive away. But I had no idea how much worse things could really get. The drive stretched on much longer than I had anticipated, winding through a seemingly endless expanse of dense forest that only seemed to grow darker, the trees thickening into a near impenetrable wall of shadow on either side of the road. I had been driving for over an hour now, following the printed directions that had come attached to the email, since the address wasn't listed anywhere on Google Maps. And as much as I tried to convince myself that it was just an old, private property, something tucked away from the outside world, something only accessible to those who knew exactly where to find it, I couldn't shake the gnawing sensation that I was heading toward something that didn't want to be found, something that existed, beyond the normal rules of places and people and time itself. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, my fingers stiff and aching from the cold, my breath fogging up slightly against the windshield, even though the heater was turned up just enough to keep the chill at bay. The road ahead of me was narrow, cracked in places where the asphalt had begun to crumble from years of neglect, and there were no road signs, no mile markers, no indication that anyone had driven this way recently, if ever. There were no other cars, no street lights, no comforting glow of distant houses nestled safely in the woods. There was nothing but the towering trees, pressing in on either side like silent sentinels, their skeletal branches twisting high above me, blotting out more and more of the sky with every passing mile. It was as if I was driving into another world entirely. The deeper I went, the more unsettling the silence became. It wasn't just the absence of cars or buildings or streetlights. It was the absolute, suffocating lack of sound itself. No birds, no insects, no rustling of animals moving through the underbrush. Just the low hum of my car's engine, the rhythmic crunch of my tires against the decaying road, and the whisper of the wind slipping through the trees, carrying with it a strange, almost metallic scent that I couldn't quite place, something sharp and unfamiliar that set my nerves on edge. I tried to shake the feeling, try to focus on the road, but there was something in the way the trees loomed, their shadows stretching too long, their outlines jagged and unnatural against the dimming light. Every now and then, I swore I caught movement in my peripheral vision, just the faintest flicker of something shifting between the trunks, something standing just beyond the reach of my headlights. But every time I turned my head to look, there was nothing. Nothing but the trees. Nothing but the silence. Nothing but the heavy, oppressive weight of being watched. I had been following the directions carefully, counting the miles, checking the odometer, making sure I hadn't veered off course. According to the paper sitting in the passenger seat, I was supposed to turn left in unmarked gravel road exactly 47 miles in, something that felt so absurdly specific that it only made me more uneasy. And yet, when I reached the 47-mile mark, I didn't see a turn at all. There was nothing but the road continuing ahead, vanishing into the thickening woods, and for a brief, panicked moment, I wondered if I had made a mistake somewhere along the way, if I had misread the instructions, if I had somehow already gotten myself lost in a place that wasn't meant to be navigated by people like me. I slowed down, my heart starting to beat a little too fast, my palms slick against the wheel, and just as I was about to consider pulling over to double-check the directions, I saw it. The road wasn't visible until I was right on top of it. A narrow stretch of gravel, almost completely hidden between two massive trees, their thick, gnarled roots curling out of the ground like grasping fingers, creating an archway so unnatural that it felt intentional, as if the forest had been deliberately concealing it, as if it had only revealed itself because I was meant to see it. My stomach twisted, every muscle in my body suddenly screaming at me to turn around, to hit the gas, and get as far away from this place as I could before it was too late. But I didn't, because I had driven too far, because I had already come this far, because no matter how deep my unease had settled, no matter how loudly my instincts warned me that I had just crossed an invisible threshold into something I didn't understand, I was still broke, still hungry, still desperate. So, against every last bit of common sense I had left, I turned onto the gravel road. And that was the first decision I made that I couldn't undo. The moment my tires rolled onto the gravel, something changed. The air felt heavier, pressing down on me like an unseen weight, and the trees that lined the road were even taller than before, their canopies stretching high above, so thick and tangled that they blocked out nearly all traces of the sky, leaving me trapped beneath an endless tunnel of darkness. I checked the odometer again, watching as the miles ticked by. 1 mile, then 2, then 3. I was supposed to drive exactly 3. 6 miles before reaching the estate's gate, but somehow it felt like I had been driving for much longer. The road seemed to twist and curve in ways that didn't make sense, doubling back on itself, stretching farther than it should, the trees shifting too close to the edges of the road, their branches almost brushing against the car as if they were leaning in. And then, through the blur of moving shadows, I saw it. A figure, standing just beyond the tree line. I only caught a glimpse of it, just the briefest flicker of a shape barely illuminated by my headlights. But my breath hitched in my throat, my fingers tightening around the wheel. A person? No, not a person. Something about the way it stood, unmoving, rigid, its form slightly blurred at the edges as if it wasn't quite there, sent ice-cold fear dripping down my spine. I told myself it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, just a trick of the shadows, just a tree stump, just a figment of my imagination. But then I passed another, and another, all of them standing still, hidden between the trees, watching. The closer I got to the end of the road, the closer they seemed to be. By the time I reached the estate, I could feel the weight of their unseen eyes pressing against my skin, and even though I never saw them move, I knew, somehow impossibly, that they had gotten closer. And then, as suddenly as the trees had swallowed me, the forest ended. The road spilled into an enormous clearing, where the first thing I saw was the estate. A monstrous thing, looming and ancient, its towering frames silhouetted against the deep red glow of the setting sun, its peaked roofs and narrow windows creating jagged, unnatural angles that made the entire structure look more like a cage than a home. The house was massive, sprawling across the clearing with its intricate ironwork, its Gothic architecture casting long, claw-like shadows against the ground. The iron fence surrounding it was so high, so fortified, that for a moment I wondered if it was designed not to keep people out, but to keep something in. And yet, despite everything, despite the suffocating sense of wrongness that coiled in my chest like a living thing, despite the way my instincts screamed at me to leave while I still could, the front gate was open, like it had been expecting me. I hesitated, my foot hovering over the brake, my heart pounding so loudly I could feel it in my fingertips, my vision tunneling in on the house, the gate, the creeping darkness settling over the clearing like a living, breathing thing. And then, the front doors swung open, and I knew I should not have come here. The man standing in the doorway was unlike anyone I had ever seen before, his presence so commanding, so unnervingly still, that for a moment I felt as though I had stepped not into the home of a wealthy recluse, but into some dark fairy tale where the figures from stories, the ones that lurk in shadows, the ones that watch from the edges of forgotten places, have been waiting for me to arrive. He was tall, impossibly so, with a frame that seemed to stretch with the house itself, as if the very architecture had been shaped to accommodate his form rather than the other way around. His suit was dark, tailored so precisely to his body that it almost looked like it had been stitched directly onto his skin, the fabric smooth, unwrinkled, untouched by time or movement. And then there were his eyes, sharp, piercing, so pale a shade of blue that they almost looked silver under the dim light of the estate's entrance, reflecting the dying embers of the sunset behind me. I wanted to say something, a greeting, a question, anything to shatter the thick, suffocating silence that hung between us. But before I could even part my lips, before I could muster the courage to speak, he did it first. "You're here," he said, his voice smooth, deep, the kind of voice that carried weight, that belonged to a man who was used to being obeyed without question. There was something old in his tone, something ancient, something that sent an involuntary shiver down my spine, though I had no logical reason why. It wasn't the voice of an elderly man. It was something else entirely, something that felt like it had existed long before me, long before this house, long before anything that I could comprehend. And then, without another word, he turned and stepped inside, expecting me to follow. There was no hesitation in his movement, no glance backward to ensure I was keeping up, as if he already knew that I wouldn't turn around, that no matter how much unease curled in my stomach, I would step through that doorway because there was nowhere else for me to go, no other choice left to make. I did, and the moment I crossed the threshold, I felt it. Something heavy, something unseen, something watching. The interior of the mansion was exactly what I should have expected, and yet, somehow, it wasn't. It was grand, in the way that old, forgotten places always are, with ceilings that stretched higher than they should, chandeliers hanging like frozen constellations, their glass ornaments casting fractured light across the deep mahogany walls. Everything was antique, every chair, every table, every intricate carved detail in the moldings, things that should have been relics, locked away in museums, yet here they stood, untouched by time, as though they had simply always been here. The air smelled of aged paper, of old books stacked in forgotten libraries, of polished wood that had been scrubbed down with something faintly metallic, something I couldn't quite place, but that made my throat tighten all the same. The walls were lined with portraits, figures dressed in old-fashioned clothing, staring outward with expressions so neutral that they somehow felt more unsettling than if they had been frowning. The longer I walked through the corridors, the more I felt their eyes following me, the painted irises fixed in place, but their presence shifting, adjusting, watching. Mr. Blackwood's footsteps barely made a sound as he moved, his long stride effortless, his body gliding through the dimly lit hallways like he had memorized every inch of this house long before I was even born. I hurried to keep up, my own steps clumsy, echoing against the polished wooden floors, amplifying the fact that I did not belong here. At last, he stopped. We had reached a grand staircase, one that split into two directions of the landing, its deep red carpet looking too pristine, too perfect, as if it had never once felt the weight of an uninvited guest. From his pocket, he retrieved something small and metallic, then turned to face me, his pale eyes locking onto mine with such unsettling intensity that I had to resist the urge to take a step back. He extended his hand. A single key lay in his palm, its surface old and slightly worn, but not dusty, not rusted, not forgotten. "This is for your room," he said simply, his voice leaving no room for questions. "Upstairs. Third door on the right." I hesitated, but only for a moment, before reaching out and taking it. The second my fingers brushed against the metal, I swore I felt a jolt of something, not quite an electric shock, but something deeper, something I couldn't explain, something that settled into my bones and made my breath hitch in my throat. I swallowed, forcing my voice to steady itself. "What exactly do I do here?" My words came out quieter than I intended, barely more than a breath of sound, but he heard them. He didn't blink. He didn't pause. He simply lifted a hand and pointed to something on the far wall. A framed piece of parchment, mounted with careful precision, the edges yellowed with age, though the ink was dark and bold, untouched by time. The rules. I stepped closer, my heart thudding unevenly as I read them. 1. You do not go into the West Wing. 2. You do not leave after dark. 3. And under no circumstances are you to answer the knocking. I read them once, then again, expecting the words to shift, to clarify, to make sense, but they didn't. Each line sat heavy on the page, as if they had always existed, as if they had been waiting for someone else to come along and read them, waiting for me to stand here now, to feel the weight of them settling into my chest. Something inside me, something buried deep, something instinctual, something that had been screaming at me ever since I pulled onto that gravel road, told me to leave. Told me that no amount of money was worth whatever was happening here, that no paycheck was high enough to justify being in a place that needed rules like these. I should have dropped the key. I should have turned around, walked back through the front door, gotten into my car, and I never looked back. Instead, I nodded, and that was the second mistake that sealed my fate. By the time I reached my room, exhaustion weighed down on me like a lead blanket, wrapping itself around my limbs and settling deep into my bones. But no matter how physically drained I felt, there was an ever-present unease coiling tightly around my ribs, a quiet, suffocating discomfort that had followed me from the moment I stepped through the towering doors of Blackwood Estate, and had only grown heavier with each passing second. The house, though grand in its architecture and meticulous in its upkeep, did not feel like a place where people lived, but rather like a relic from another time, a carefully preserved monument to something long past, a structure that had never quite let go of the echoes of those who had once moved through its halls. As I made my way down the corridor toward the room that Mr. Blackwood had assigned to me, I couldn't shake the sensation that the house itself was subtly shifting around me, the air growing heavier with every step I took, the flickering glow of the candle sconces along the walls casting strange, elongated shadows that danced and twisted in ways that didn't quite align with the movement of the flames. The hallway was lined with portraits, old, regal, their subjects posed in stiff-backed, aristocratic stillness, their gazes unwavering and fixed forward. But as I passed them, I felt an unsettling pull in my gut, an irrational certainty that the painted eyes, though frozen on the canvas, were somehow aware of my presence, that they were observing me rather than merely existing as decoration. I told myself that I was just imagining things, that my mind was simply playing tricks on me, that the weight of the day and the eerie isolation of this place were working together to fabricate a paranoia that had no real foundation. But no matter how much I tried to dismiss the feeling, the hairs on the back of my neck remained stiff, the instinctual urge to look over my shoulder gnawing at me with every step I took. By the time I reached the third door on the right, my fingers gripping the small metal key Mr. Blackwood had given me so tightly that the grooves pressed painfully into my palm, my heart was hammering so fast I could feel the pulse in my throat. The key turned in the lock with a smoothness that felt almost too effortless, as though the door had already been waiting to open for me, as though I had simply fulfilled an expectation by arriving. When I stepped inside, the air was noticeably different, thick, stagnant, carrying the scent of aged wood and something else, something just beneath the surface, something I couldn't quite name, but that made my stomach twist with a quiet, unexplainable dread. The bedroom itself was undeniably beautiful, a vast space with high, sloping ceilings and intricate molding along the walls, the kind of lavish, old-world grandeur that you'd expect to see in the private quarters of nobility, not in a house that was supposedly unoccupied aside from its mysterious owner. A massive four-poster bed stood against the farthest wall, its canopy of deep red fabric cascading down like the drapes of an ornate theater stage, its silk sheets smooth and unrumpled, as though they had never been slept in. Across from the bed, a tall wooden dresser, polished to perfection, stood beneath a large mirror, the kind with an intricately carved frame, its glass reflecting the dim candlelight with a softness that seemed almost unnatural. Everything about the room was pristine, eerily untouched, as though no one had ever truly lived in this space, as though it had been meticulously prepared for someone else, for someone new, for someone who had just arrived and was meant to stay. And that realization made me uneasy in a way I couldn't quite put into words. I dropped my bag onto a chair near the dresser, exhaling slowly as I tried to shake off the lingering discomfort pressing down on me, telling myself that I was overthinking everything, that my nerves were simply frayed from the exhaustion of the past few weeks, that I was allowing the unfamiliarity of this place to get under my skin when, in reality, there was nothing truly wrong here. Trying to distract myself from my own growing paranoia, I made my way toward the window, reaching out to pull aside the heavy velvet curtains, expecting to see some glimpse of the surrounding landscape, some reassuring sight of civilization, of a road, of distant lights, of anything that would remind me that I wasn't completely isolated in the middle of nowhere. But what I saw instead made my breath catch in my throat. Beyond the glass, stretching far into the distance in every direction, was nothing but dense, impenetrable forest, the skeletal branches of the trees clawing toward the sky, twisting together to form a tangled, suffocating prison of blackened. There were no towns, no houses, no signs of life beyond this estate. Just the overwhelming presence of the wilderness, vast and unyielding, as though it had swallowed this place whole, as though it had been waiting for someone like me to stumble into its grasp. And there, at the very edge of the property, barely visible through the thickening darkness, stood the gate, still open, still waiting. A sudden wave of nausea curled in my stomach, and without thinking, I let the curtain fall back into place, shutting out the sight, forcing myself to breathe, to rationalize, to remind myself that I had already made my choice, that this was where I needed to be, that whatever uneasy feelings I had were nothing more than my exhausted mind manufacturing fears where none existed. But the feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I must have drifted off at some point, though I don't remember closing my eyes, don't remember fully succumbing to sleep, because when I awoke, it wasn't to the gentle stir of morning light creeping in through the curtains or the distant sound of birds outside. It was to a noise. A steady, deliberate noise. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was soft, measured, patient, and for the first few seconds, still caught in the hazy fog of waking, I almost didn't react. My sluggish brain tried to convince me that I had imagined it, that the sound wasn't real, that it was part of a dream I couldn't quite remember. But then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. My body went rigid beneath the sheets, every inch of me locking into place as my heart pounded violently against my ribs, my breath caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat. It wasn't at my door. Not yet. It was somewhere further down the hall, distant but unmistakable, the weight of it carrying through the thick silence of the house, threading itself into the darkness like a whisper curling beneath a locked door. I wanted to believe it was nothing, that it was just the house settling, that it was just my imagination twisting mundane sounds into something more sinister. But even as I tried to convince myself, my mind was already replaying the rules, the carefully printed words mounted on the wall downstairs. Under no circumstances are you to answer the knocking. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to stay still, willing my body to ignore the cold sweat gathering at the back of my neck, willing my lungs to take in slow, even breaths as my pulse thrummed loudly in my ears. And then knock, knock, knock. This time it was closer. I forced myself not to move, not to react, not to do anything that would let whatever was outside my door know that I was awake, that I had heard it, that I was aware of it. The knocking continued, steady and unhurried, as though whoever or whatever was making the sound had all the time in the world, as though it was waiting for something, waiting for me to break the rule, waiting for me to do exactly what I wasn't supposed to. And then, after what felt like hours, it finally stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I don't remember how long I stayed frozen in place, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence, waiting for the knocking to start again. But it didn't. And when I finally fell into a restless, uneasy sleep, I dreamed of something standing just outside my door, waiting for me to let it in.